Today, I'd like to welcome back to the Enzian my colleague, Nicole Richter. She's an associate professor of critical media and cultural studies at Rollins and a chair of our film studies program. She's also the author of a perfect text for our film club, The Moving Image, A Complete Introduction to Film. Nicole will speak with us today about experimental cinema using the 1966 film Daisies, and will help facilitate a conversation after our film ends. So please welcome Nicole.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So I'm super excited about today's screening of Daisies. It's one of my absolute favorite films, and I think that it's unlike anything I've ever seen, and I'm interested to see if you have the same experience. So before we dive into the film, I want to set the stage briefly by talking about experimental cinema. So what is it? Why does it exist? And why do feminist filmmakers in particular use it to radically expand the possibilities of film? So Daisies sits right at this intersection of being very rebellious at the formal level and also very politically defiant in a playful way. And having that context, I think, helps us to understand the experience we have while we're watching it. So, what is experimental cinema? Sometimes it's called avant-garde cinema, and it's less a genre and more a mode of creative resistance. It's a tradition defined by artists who look at the rules of movies and ask, what if we didn't do that? From the earliest experiments of the 1920s, such as the surrealism of Buñuel or Salvador Dali, experimental cinema has asked us to see film not just a container for a story, but as an expressive tool in itself. It treats cinema as an art of rhythm, color, texture, idea. And importantly, experimental cinema has primarily functioned outside of mainstream systems. It's a space of freedom where small budgets and independent distribution allow artists to break the rules without thinking about popularity or box office. That freedom has made it a fertile ground for personal, political, and philosophical exploration, moving culture forward long before the mainstream catches up. So instead of prioritizing plot, character arcs, or continuity editing, experimental filmmakers play with the form itself. They create sensations instead of stories. One useful way to think about experimental cinema is to compare it to other art forms. Just as abstract painting doesn't try to replicate reality, experimental film doesn't try to replicate narrative realism. It's closer to poetry than to the novel, and meaning emerges through association rather than explanation. Importantly, experimental films also tend to draw attention to the materials of cinema itself. So the editing, the color, the sound, the timing. These elements don't disappear into the background the way that they normally do in a traditional film. Instead, they announce themselves to us. So when you suddenly notice something at the level of editing, or you see a repeated gesture, or the tone of the film shifts very rapidly, this is the film reminding you that you are watching something that's constructed, and it's calling attention to itself. And that self-awareness was very important, especially in the 20th century, when many artists decided to distrust easy meanings, easy explanations, traditional storytelling, because of wars and political upheavals and the rise of mass media. Experimental artists basically questioned whether telling stories in a traditional way was just supporting a world that was unjust and unequal. So when looking at experimental cinema, it often refuses interpretation on purpose. Instead of offering a single message, it invites multiple readings, or in some cases, none at all. We're trained to ask, what does this mean? And experimental cinema often replies, what did you notice? What did you feel? That shift places responsibility on the viewer. Watching an experimental film is an active process. You're not being carried along by plot, you're making meaning as you go. Moments that feel confusing, irritating, or baffling are often just as important as moments that feel beautiful and funny. It's also worth noting that experimental cinema often emerges at moments of cultural or political constraint and repression. When speech is limited or art is expected to behave, experimentation becomes a way to resist control. Ambiguity becomes a shield. Absurdity becomes critique. This becomes especially relevant when we think about voices historically marginalized in mainstream cinema. Women, queer artists, people of color, and artists working under political restrictions. Mainstream cinematic language is very good at telling certain kinds of stories, but it's very bad at representing experiences that don't fit into tidy arcs. Since the 1960s and 70s in particular, feminist filmmakers realized that simply telling better stories about women wasn't enough, because the form of cinema itself often reinforced the structures they wanted to critique: objectification, passivity, morality. So feminist experimental cinema didn't just change the characters, it changed the rules. Instead of neat arcs and moral lessons, these films embraced mess, excess, contradiction, and refusal. They asked, what if women didn't explain themselves? What if they didn't grow? What if they didn't symbolize anything at all? That brings us to Daisies. This is a key film from the Czech New Wave, and it was released in 1966. The film follows two young women, Marie 1 and Marie 2, who decide that since the world is spoiled, they will be spoiled too. There is no conventional plot. Formally, the film is very playful. Jump cuts, sudden shifts in color, black and white, collage sequences, repetition, playful editing, these all call attention to the film itself. The filmmaker embraces anarchic play to critique social norms, especially norms around femininity, obedience, consumption, and proper behavior. The film was controversial enough to be banned for a period by the Czech government, and the filmmaker is blacklisted, officially for its depiction of wasted food. But that detail matters. In a system obsessed with order, productivity, and seriousness, Daisies was dangerous precisely because it was excessive, unproductive, and unserious. The real transgression is that the Maries refuse to behave. They are loud, hungry, unapologetic. They do not learn lessons, and they are not sorry. The filmmaker rejected the label feminist, but the film embodies feminist politics through its form and attitude. It doesn't just depict rebellious women, it behaves rebelliously itself. So, as you watch Daisies this morning, I invite you to notice when the film calls attention to its own construction. Notice the shifts in color and editing, repetition and mimicry between the two Maries. Notice the playfulness and the attitude of the film. And try asking, what is this doing? When does it delight me? When does it frustrate me? And what expectations about women, about cinema, about meaning itself, does it quietly dismantle? Daisies is a film that is deeply alive. It continues to influence filmmakers today because it reminds us that formal experimentation can be a way to articulate freedom, even when that freedom is messy. So, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoy the wild energy of the film, and I look forward to hearing about your experience of the film afterward. Thank you. Enjoy.